You wake up at 3 a.m. with a fever that won't break. You don't panic. You reach for your phone, you call an ambulance. Or you drive to an ER that's open 24 hours a day, staffed by people trained for a decade to keep you alive. That safety net feels permanent, like it's always existed. It hasn't. For over 95% of human history, that safety net didn't exist at all. No ambulance, no ER, no building designed to save your life. If you got sick at 3 a.m. 1,000 years ago, the person who saved you or didn't was your neighbor, your grandmother, or a stranger who believed healing was a favor owed to the gods. So, who were these people? And what did they know that we've completely forgotten? Here's the number that should stop you cold. The modern hospital as you understand it, beds, sterile tools, trained doctors. Night shifts is barely 150 years old, which means for roughly 300,000 years of human existence, we survived plagues, childbirth, broken bones, and wars without a single hospital. And somehow, we're still here. You're proof of it. That leaves two questions worth sitting with. One, if there were no hospitals, who actually took care of the sick? Two, and this is the strange one, why? When healing finally did get organized, did it begin inside temples, not clinics? By the end of this story, you'll see something most people never connect. The hospital wasn't invented by science. It was invented by compassion long before anyone understood why compassion worked. And tracing that path backward will change how you see the next hospital bracelet you ever wear. A healer in ancient Egypt reading a wound like a sentence. A sick man sleeping on a temple floor in Greece, waiting for a dream. A Roman noblewoman washing the feet of strangers dying in her own home. A monk in a candlelit hall tending 40 beds at once. A plague doctor's mask filled with flowers walking through empty streets. Every single one of these people is a stepping stone. Follow them, and you'll walk the entire road from superstition to the hospital bed. Meet Imhotep, architect, priest, and by most historical accounts, the closest thing the ancient world had to a doctor. Centuries after his death, the Egyptians worshipped him as a god of medicine. But here's what's easy to miss. Imhotep's real gift wasn't magic. It was observation. Egyptian physicians examined wounds, described symptoms, and recorded treatments on papyrus. The Edwin Smith Papyrus alone lists over 40 real surgical cases, describing what a doctor should look for, not just what spell to chant. Long before medicine had microscopes, it had something almost as powerful: written memory. The first hospitals wouldn't be buildings. They'd be scrolls passed hand to hand. So one healer's mistake didn't have to be repeated by the next. But writing things down only helps if someone's willing to stay with the sick. And that idea of staying was about to take a strange turn in Greece. Picture hundreds of sick people lying shoulder to shoulder on the floor of a temple dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing. This place was called an Asclepion, and it functioned in practice as the ancient world's closest version of a hospital. The ritual was called incubation. You fasted, you prayed, and you slept inside the temple, hoping the god would visit you in a dream and reveal your cure. Priests recorded these dreams. Some patients really did wake up feeling better. Historians now believe the Asclepion worked for a brutally simple reason: rest, clean water, quiet, and human attention. Strip away the mythology, and you were left with the first rule of every hospital that would ever exist. Remove the sick from chaos, and the body often does the rest. This is also where Hippocrates enters the story, not as a miracle worker, but as the man who dared to say fevers weren't punishments from angry gods. They were biology. He was quite literally arguing with the temple next door, but Greece still treated healing as a private act between a god and a patient. It took an entirely different empire to ask a more dangerous question. What if healing was a public duty? Meet Fabiola, a wealthy Roman noblewoman living in the late 300 CE. While emperors built monuments to themselves, Fabiola did something almost nobody in Rome had done before. She opened her own home, converted it into a dedicated space for the sick, and personally cleaned wounds that even trained physicians refused to touch. Leprosy, gangrene, disfiguring disease. Contemporary writers describe the sight as almost unbelievable for a woman of her rank. Fabiola's house is widely credited by historians as the first hospital in the Western world built specifically for public treatment, rather than private worship or private wealth. The turning point wasn't a new medical discovery, it was a decision. The sick deserve a dedicated place, staffed by people who chose to stay. Fabiola proved individuals could build sanctuaries. But what happens when an entire institution takes on that duty permanently? Generation after generation, across medieval Europe, monasteries became the next link in the chain. Places like the Hôtel Dieu in Paris, founded around 651 CE, ran continuously for over 1,000 years, one of the oldest hospitals on earth. Monks and nuns took vows that included caring for travelers, the poor and the dying, regardless of ability to pay. Meanwhile, in the early Islamic world, figures like Rufaida al-Aslamiyah, often cited as history's first named nurse, organized structured medical care for wounded soldiers as early as the 7th century, and the Bimaristans of Baghdad and Damascus became genuine medical institutions, with rotating physicians, pharmacies, and even early forms of patient records. These weren't charity as an afterthought. They were charity as infrastructure. The first time healing had a schedule, a staff, and a door that never locked. Then came the disease that would either destroy this entire system or force it to evolve faster than 1,000 years of tradition ever had. The Black Death didn't just kill an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population. It exposed, brutally, that prayer and rest weren't enough against something this fast, this merciless. Plague doctors, in their strange beaked masks stuffed with herbs, weren't healers in the way we'd recognize. Most had little formal training. But the crisis itself forced European cities to do something new: quarantine. The word comes from the Venetian. 40 giorni, 40 days, the length of time. Incoming ships were forced to wait offshore before docking. Quarantine was humanity's first large-scale public health system not built on understanding germs, which wouldn't be discovered for another 500 years, but built on pure pattern recognition. Sickness spreads faster near sickness. Rest, temples, monasteries, quarantine piece by piece. Every ingredient of the modern hospital was assembling itself. All that was missing was one final idea. Why any of it actually worked. Enter Florence Nightingale, tending British soldiers during the Crimean War in the 1850s. She didn't just nurse the wounded, she counted them. She tracked death rates by cause and discovered something horrifying. More soldiers were dying from filthy hospital conditions than from battle wounds themselves. Her data helped force something radical. Hospitals redesigned around cleanliness, airflow, and sanitation years before germ theory, championed by Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister, gave the world proof of why it mattered. The modern hospital wasn't born the moment we discovered germs. It was born the moment someone had the discipline to measure suffering and refused to look away from the numbers. Look back at the whole chain, and a pattern emerges that no single culture planned. Egypt gave medicine its memory. Greece gave it rest. Rome gave it a building. The monasteries gave it permanence. The plague gave it distance, and the 1800s finally gave it proof. Every hospital bed on earth today is standing on 6 inherited ideas carried 1 century at a time by people who never met each other. Before there was medicine, there was mercy. Medicine just learned to keep mercy's receipts. So the next time you walk into an emergency room, cold floor, fluorescent lights, a nurse asking your name, remember what you're actually standing inside of. You're not standing in a building. You're standing in the final chapter of a 3,000-year-old promise, made first by a priest in Egypt, a temple in Greece, a woman in Rome, a monk who never locked his doors, and a nurse who refused to stop counting the dead until people listened. They didn't have your ambulance. They didn't have your antibiotics. But they had the one thing every hospital still runs on today long after the marble columns and the beaked masks are gone. They chose to stay.